There's a lot of excitement swirling in Albany these days as we kick off a new session up here. Hi there, I'm David Smith with Meet the Leaders, and we are pleased to have Assemblyman Victor Pichardo as our guest on this edition of Meet the Leaders of the 86th District. It's good to see you, Assemblyman. How are you?
Always a pleasure. I feel becoming an old man every year. We talk about what's going on.
You are among the youngest guys in town, as a matter of fact.
Sure.
And you wear it so very well.
Well, I try. This is going to be my 6th legislative session at this point, and it really does feel very different, very exciting than years past. And I hope that a lot of us, particularly the newest members, we can drive that energy in creating some positive change for all of our constituents across the state.
Well, I mentioned you're one of the younger ones,
Yeah.
but we've talked to younger and older and in-betweens, and everybody seems to feel that same way. They seem to be very fired up about things.
Absolutely. I think it's a new day in Albany, where I believe that a lot of folks who got elected either were not involved in government or have a different perspective, and I think change is good. So, like I said, now the Senate has changed hands in terms of leadership and the majority, so it's going to be an exciting day, and I know that my colleagues in the Senate are interested and willing to sort of rewrite the script and how government in Albany functions as a whole, and hopefully to the benefit of all New Yorkers across the state.
Well, as you suggested, a lot of new faces, a lot of grassroots efforts came to fruition in November, didn't they?
Absolutely. And I think really what it came down to is that people understood not only tangibly, but how it affected and how government impacts their lives. And they saw, if there was either a lack of leadership or anything of that nature that's happened on the federal government, it really energized people and got a lot of people not only involved to run for office, but, vote for the first time, register to vote, take their parents to go vote for the first time. And it was a new energy and a new sort of enthusiasm to participate civically that we haven't seen in, I would dare to say, in a few generations. So it's a good thing, but ultimately what happens is that the folks who got sent up here to represent the interests of New Yorkers from Fayetteville to Buffalo to the Bronx, that we have to do a good job by then, and we need to make sure that we are responsible caretakers of our government and make sure that we represent our constituents responsibly.
I was going to say, after all is said and done, accountability.
Absolutely.
Rears its head.
Absolutely.
And if you don't do it, found out, you can be bounced just as quickly as you can be bounced in.
As it should be, because folks who are in government they're not kings or queens. They are simply caretakers of legislative seats, and if you're not doing the job, then you should be fired. And that's a lot of folks went through that process. Some were through some difficult politics, but at the end of the day, I think really it's this new energy that is coming into the legislature. I think it's going to be net positive for all of us, and particularly for all New Yorkers across the state.
Prioritize for you. What are you most interested in getting going?
So for me, the most direct thing that I can talk about is rent reform. Rent regulations are expiring this year in 2019, and most of my constituents are renters in the Bronx. So strengthening rent laws and protecting tenants more vociferously and more vigorously, I think it's very important. Unfortunately, a colleague of ours, Senator Peralta, passed away, and one of his life's works was to support and pass the DREAM Act. And I think, this year is going to be the year not only do we pass the DREAM Act and support dreamers across the state, but also memorialize and canonize a friend and a public servant who dedicated his life to improving the well-beings and the lives of immigrants across the state. On top of that, there's a lot of pet projects that I'm working on. I mentioned briefly the issue of basic universal income. And, it's been a concept that's been battered around not only in the West Coast, but in different parts of the country. And having this conversation in New York, I think, is going to be very important in talking about how government can directly impact the lives of everyday people, not only here in the state, but across this country.
Well, you've got a large plate to deal with here, with all of those things.
Well, that's the idea. I mean, I don't sit idly by and make sure that I think the taxpayers deserve that they get the most out of the biggest bang for their buck, so to speak, out of their tax dollars. And I will make sure that every single waking moment that I'm here and in my district, that I am not only working for my constituents, but for all New Yorkers across the state.
Given the reality of the housing situation, rent regulations are ultimately key. What kind of support are you seeing around the Assembly?
Well, I think the Assembly has been traditionally in supporting tenants across the state and in New York City when it comes to rent regulations and tenants' rights. And I think right now a lot of the folks who got elected into the Senate ran specifically on that issue. Specifically, I can point to Senator Salazar from Brooklyn, who ran on this issue of universal rent control, and most of her platform was on that issue. So I know that a lot of my incoming colleagues, particularly in the Senate, have been talking about this issue, and it was a powerful issue across the board. So not only impacts my constituents here in the Bronx, but impacts constituents in Brooklyn and impacts folks in Westchester and Yonkers. And I think it's important that we continue to talk this conversation and frame it that that we have to do everything that we can to protect tenants and make the playing field as level and as even as possible for everybody.
Getting the impression it can be done this year?
I believe so. I think we don't have a choice. It expires this year, so either we let it expire and do nothing, or we pass something that improves the law itself and creates a more favorability for tenants and also protects them and codifies a lot of the rights that they have to make sure that they're not evicted for no arbitrary reason or harassed by landlords, and making sure that folks have their fair day in court and that people feel comfortable, safe, and protected and have this sense of security that they'll have a home to go to from day in and day out.
Everybody needs that. No question
Absolutely,
about
absolutely.
it. Excuse me.
No, sure.
Assemblyman Victor Pichardo, our guest, kicking off a new session up here in Albany. Thanks so much, Assemblyman.
My pleasure.
Great to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Wish you all the very best.
It's going to be a fun year this year.
It is indeed. And there will be more right here with us.
Absolutely.
On Meet the Leaders. I'm David Smith.